What's up? Welcome to Backend Stuff. This is episode 2 in Elixir Basics. Before we can dive into writing any code, we have to talk about one of the tools we installed with Elixir. It's called Mix. Mix manages development tasks for us. This build tool is similar to Rake for Ruby or Make for C. It's the tool we'll be using to compile our code, run our tests, and fetch our dependencies, and create projects. So let's go ahead and jump right in and we'll create our first project using Mix. So let's go ahead and hit Command Spacebar and open our terminal. And I'll make this a little bigger for us so we can see. Let's go ahead and just change directories, CD to our desktop. You can go into any directory you want for creating your project here. And we're going to just do, let's verify that Elixir is still in fact installed. So that's Elixir -- version. And you can see that we have Elixir 1.13.4 right there. And now to create a new project with Mix, we're just going to do Mix New, and then the name of our project. We're going to say Blork, because that's the name of the alien back there. His name is Blork. And then we can hit enter, and you can see that it generated a few files for us. We are going to concentrate and worry about 3 important ones today. We care about this mix.exs file. And basically, on a macro level, this describes our project. And then we're going to look at blork.ex. And this is a sample project, or an example program. It shows us how the structure is set up. So with modules and functions, and we'll step through that shortly. And then we're going to look at this blork_tests.exs. And that has written tests for our example program in Blork. And so we're going to look at those 3 files right now and kind of run through them. All right, so I created this directory. I'm going to just go ahead and clear out this. I created this directory on our desktop, so you'll see our project right there. The IDE that I prefer using is Visual Studio Code. So we're going to go ahead and open up our folder on our desktop, and it's called Blork. So go ahead and open that up, and we'll close this, get started. And so let's go ahead and open up the lib folder and expand the text folder as well. So the 3 files we're going to take a look at are our mix.exs, our blork.ex, and our blork_test.exs. And .exs is interpreted scripts. That is what that extension means. And then the .ex is actually compiled source files. And those are pretty much the only extensions you're going to see as we're writing our own Elixir projects. All right, so let's start and open up the example program that was created, the blork.ex file. And you can see that there's just a little bit going on here. It basically shows us our typical program structure. There is a declared module, and a module holds all of our code. And there is some documentation in here, and also a declared function. And the nice thing about Elixir is its strong emphasis on documentation. So whenever you see like an @doc sign, that signifies that you should add documentation there. So like as you create more functions, you should kind of copy what exists. And if you look at like the @module doc, you see this, and you would put your documentation for this module right here. So you could just have your definition or what this module is used for. And then we also have this hello function right here. And this @doc is how you document a function. So you have the name of the function and then examples of how to use it. So you can call it by calling the module blork.hello, and it will return an atom called world. And an atom is a constant whose value is its own name. So in some other languages, they might call these symbols. It's just helpful to have distinct values for just like a constant that you might use. The constant is just world, but an atom has a colon in front of it. And you can also have it returned in its string version, which would just be world without the colon. But we'll get into atoms more into depth later. We're just kind of going over the structure of this program. Let's go ahead and go into the blork_tests. And we also get an example of a test written for us. And basically what this does is it shows you that we're using this xunit.case. So we're importing a macro. And a macro is an already written code from like a dependency we might have installed or anything else. So we're using xunit.case here, okay? And that gives us functionality to assert. And then we can basically say that we're going to test our .ex, our program blork file. So this doc test gives us full access to every function that's in there. And if we call the blork.hello, we want it to equal this atom, :world. So let's go ahead and pull up our terminal again. And a couple cool things here. We have basically an Elixir shell that our interactive Elixir that we can start up. And the way that we do that is we have to cd into our project, which is called blork. All right, and then if we type in IEX space $S mix, this basically it compiled our project, and now we have all the code written. We have access to all the code written, right? And so the -s starts Elixir with everything in our project that we need to call the functions within our project. And since we only have one module and one function, let's just kind of play around with what we can do with this shell. So we know that we have a module called blork, right? So if we wanted to see our documentation of that, we can get the module information by typing H, BLORK. And this is going to get any documentation written for our blork module. And there we go. Documentation for blork. It is blork. All right. So if we went back into our blork.ex file, you can see documentation for blork. And if you go back here, documentation for blork. So whatever we wrote there would show up there. And then if we wanted to see our documentation for a function, we can do the same thing, h.blork.hello. And now we see the hello world, and we also see the example, which is pretty cool. And right here, you can see that the example given is actually in the Elixir shell. So if we type in blork.hello, open parentheses, close parentheses, it should return the atom world. And there we go. The atom world was returned to us. So that's pretty cool. We can test out all of our functions in this Elixir shell. So it allows us to test things out. Now, if we wanted to know, like, we could have other functions written in here. And we could have multiple functions. And if they're public, they're just written with def. If they're private functions, it's def p. So this would be a private hello. And then do, and this is just going to be a quick example. This is going to be private world, okay? So we created a quick private function. You don't have to understand how it works yet. But now if we want to see all the public functions in a module, we can just type in exports blork. Exports blork, not singular. And we can see that there's one function and it's hello. And we've called that one and we have access to it. But we don't see our private function. Kind of cool, right? So let's return let's just delete the P on our private hello, save it, and let's go ahead and hit exports blork. Oh, we might have to compile. Just exit out, Control C twice will get us out of the Elixir shell. And then if we do mix compile, it will recompile our code. So now if we go back into our shell, ix-s.mix, we can do our exports blork, and we'll now see that we have access to 2 public functions, which is pretty cool. And then if we go ahead and make this private again, we're going to have to Control C twice, and let's do a mix compile, and then go back into our shell and do an exports blork, and we only have 1 public function. So that is pretty cool. And then when you're in the shell, like let's say we just changed our code again, Command S to save. If we wanted to not leave the shell, we can simply do recompile. It just recompiled. And then if we do exports blork, it's there again. So you can either use compile with mix, or you can do recompile within the shell. So now you just learned a quicker way to do it in the shell if you're just testing things out. And then if you want to know just like the full list of commands, you can do mix help. Oh, I'm sorry, Command C twice. And then if you want to know what is all available in mix, you can do mix help. And it gives you an entire list of everything here. And so you can see things like test. So mix test will run our tests for us. Mix run will start and run our current program. And so there's a lot of cool stuff. And then mix deps git will install all of our dependencies that we want to use. And as we go through and write code, we'll touch on a lot more of these. But when we were in the blork tests file, we saw that we have a test here. And if we call this function, it should equal the :world, the atom world, right? So we can just do mix test and it runs. And look, we have 1 test and 0 failures, so it passed. So this 1 test passed. And if I change this to worlds, hit save, and run the test again, we're going to get a failure. So now we know that something that we changed in our code is breaking our test. So we know to go back to this function and figure it out. But we'll go ahead and fix that and save it so the test works. And now let's go into our mix.exs file. This is pretty much the description of our project. So we have our app name here, which is blork. We have the version of our app, which you can manually set or even write a script. Every time that you build this or launch this to your server, you would change this number. And then the version of Elixir that we're using. And then an environment check. So the start permanent, if it's a production environment, this will be set to true. And then deps here is actually for dependencies. And you can see it's calling a function. So deps with an open and closed parentheses is actually calling this private function down here. And we don't have any dependencies here. So it would call and run and install these dependencies in a list, right? And since we don't have any dependencies, if we were to just say we want a dependency added, we can easily do this with an opening curly bracket, colon, and a common dependency that we'll use is JSON. And this is just for basically returning responses in a JSON format. And so we're going to install this, and then within the quotations, we have to do a tilde greater than, and then the version that you want to use, and we'll use 1.3. And we'll go into how you find what dependency version and stuff you use as we create a real project. So I just Command S and save this. So we added a dependency, and then when we go back into the terminal, when we do mix deps.git, it will install that dependency. And since we haven't installed dependencies before, we actually don't have Hex installed, which is actually the dependency manager for Elixir. So it's asking us if we want to install it. If you just hit enter, the default is yes, or you can just put Y, enter, and we'll install Hex. And then it also went ahead and installed our JSON dependency. So it's that easy to add a dependency to your project. All right, so with that being said, we just walked through what a project looks like when you create it with Mix. And the key features here are the mix.exs file, the blork.ex, which is just an example program. So this structure will be repeated a lot as we create our projects. And then tests, which are incredibly important, and we're going to go through writing tests as we build all of our projects. And I think that pretty much wraps up what Mix is. See you next time, guys.